Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to look at part 2 of chapter 13. This is a bit longer than yesterday, but it's because we're looking at not the Americas, but Afro-Eurasia, and there is much more to discuss and talk about, of course, because there's a lot more going on and there are more people there. We spent the most time in that territory, the Eastern Hemisphere here, the entire semester. So, first, let's remind you, John Green's video on Crash Course for the 15th Century Mariners is really good. And probably if I was there, I'd show a little bit of this. And potentially maybe what I'll do is have Mrs. Duez bring this in and leave it so you can watch a little bit of it or watch it at the end of the period. It's very good. And he discusses, which is the greatest of these 15th century mariners. Is it Columbus, Da Gama, or Zheng Ha? And each of them have great accomplishments. However, they're different, and their legacy is certainly very different. So, real interesting discussion, and it's kind of fun too to consider, the big, huge size of Zheng Ha's ship and the smaller sizes of the ships of those who are in Europe. It's real similar to me. It just shows like China is this big monolith, a very big territory run by one single ruler. That's what kind of brings about the demise of those seagoing trips and those voyages. On the other hand, the really small ships of the Europeans, those little engines that are still kind of moving about and competing against each other to try to get to places that Europeans hadn't been before, and also get to Asia for the trade as well. So let's first look at China and Zheng Ha, the Chinese mariner. This guy is pretty outstanding. It's one of my more favorite things to teach and talk about. Unfortunately, I'm not there today to do that, but we'll do the best we can here. Admiral Zheng Ha was the commander. He had 300 ships. That's just a massive amount of ships, and 27,000 people sailing on those ships. I mean, 27,000 people. That's just amazing. They mostly sailed here. It says as far as the East African coast. However, that has been debated by many historians and many people, because some feel like there is some evidence of his voyages here, even off the coast of the United States. That is very questionable, and we'll talk more about that legacy as we go. This begins in the earliest part of this century in 1405, and each voyage lasts about 2 years, and he visited some 30 countries around the rim of the Indian Ocean. Something to consider and think about, pardon me, is Columbus's journey to the New World is about a 30-day trip. It's on the size of a ship that is basically the size of a yellow dog school bus. This is not a very comfortable journey to be on, and you can see an image here of what Columbus's ship would have looked like on the right side of the screen, and the massive ship that is Zheng Ha's ship. In fact, it's bigger below the water pretty much than the entire ship is here without the sail. So to visit 30 different countries, this is an amazing accomplishment for the time period. Zheng Ha was a Muslim, which is also interesting, being Chinese but a Muslim. He's a eunuch, which is also unique and interesting. That means that his uniquely male portions weren't quite what you would say, they weren't quite working like they used to. Let's just look it up here. Eunuchs. A eunuch, let's get the proper definition for you, is a man who has been, as they say here in the Wikipedia, castrated. Now, that's not very nice, is it? That means that typically, early in their life, they have this change and they're not going to be someone as a male who is threatening to the emperor or anyone else because they can't, use their equipment since it's not quite working like it used to. He was chosen to be a leader and work in the Chinese government and then become this mariner because he was less of a threat to become very powerful. His ship tech was 500 years ahead of the West. The hull technology that was used is later built very similarly to build the Titanic, although that didn't really help the Titanic situation very much. The advanced navigational techniques are startling. They're able to calculate their speed, they know what direction they're going, their latitude and longitude, and we've got some great video clips here in the notes if you're interested in watching those at home to get a better sense or feel of it. The Chinese already understood the difference between true and magnetic north, and these sea voyages that they're making were simply startling for the ancient world. If the Chinese were such great mariners, then why is Columbus so much more remembered? And you could probably say to yourself, well, it's because Columbus was American and I'm American, and so I know that it's because that's just who I'm familiar with. But in the case of Zheng He, it's also a situation where he isn't well known even in his own country. Well, we're going to get into that story here and explain it some more, but you can imagine what villagers across Southeast Asia and onto the African coast might have thought seeing these ships approach. There's got to be a sense of awe and almost like fear. And if they wanted to, the Chinese could easily have decided to load their ships in a military purpose, and they could have easily spread their empire who knows how far. This is the video link to Engineering Empire China, and it will link into about 39 minutes into the episode. So it's the very last portion of it. If you've watched some of this before, you may have missed Zheng He if you didn't finish through it. We've been watching some of this as we've gone through the semester, but he is a pretty incredible story. There's a monument to him. They're located in Malaysia. So he has somewhat of a legacy, and sometimes more of a legacy in Islamic nations or in some of the ports that he's been in or traveled to. There are traces remaining of his explorations. There's a ginger named after him. On the west coast of India, where you see there the man with the Chinese type or style of fishing nets, they're still using those. The Chinese technology ruled the seas, but Zheng He's voyages marked the beginning and the end of Imperial China's seaborne exploration, because a big and massive change happens. By 1430, the politicians, or the people running the government for China, are persuaded by the emperor to abandon global ambitions. Emperor Yongg's successors. The Yongle is the one who pushes for these missions to occur and for these trips to happen. When Yongle is no longer there, they decide to go in a very different direction. And I want you to be considering and thinking about this. Is this Taoist? Is it Confucianist? What type of philosophy in China would cause their people to pull back in and not look outside of their own country, but instead try to improve themselves on their own? This is something we've discussed quite a bit with their cultural tradition. Barbarian kings, one scholar wrote, should be greeted like harmless seagulls. The outside world has nothing to offer China. So Zheng He was recalled from sea, and his boats were destroyed. Some of them burned in the harbor that they were sitting in, and all of the records were pretty much destroyed. This is kind of crazy in a way, because they had potentially seen parts of the globe that no one from China or Asia had ever seen, and yet they're throwing it all away. And today, his voyages aren't well known in his own country, although there is some attention given to him by the educated portion of Chinese people, but nothing like, they don't have a Zheng He Day in China like we have for Columbus, and that's debatable, as we have discussed as well. These are some of the trips during the Ming Dynasty and some of the travels and routes of these Ming Dynasty voyages. And so you can see all the way up into the Red Sea, along the coast of Africa here at Mogadishu, Mombasa. I remember Great Zimbabwe was located down here. And so this is the trading network, the Indian Ocean Trading Network. What they're doing is less, they're exploring, but what they're really doing is power projecting. They're taking what we have discussed before, being this policy of the Chinese government to have people come to them and kowtow to them or participate in tribute. They're kind of taking the tribute system on the road. And what is fairly interesting is the excitement back in China about the things that are being brought back to China, like the giraffe from Africa. And they believe this is a mythical creature for a while, and there's a lot of excitement. But I think that excitement also upset the very traditional, more conservative approach of the government, and then they decide when Yongle dies to kind of stop things. So let's assume for a minute that they didn't end their voyages, maritime voyages. I guess if you put that together, it would be voyages. Sometimes it's frustrating to be me. How might the subsequent development of world history have been different if China had expanded? I think we can all think that things would have been very different. Our cultural traditions here in America would probably be stunningly different, and I am certain that Mrs. Duez and I would probably have more Chinese food. I tend to like Chinese food, but it might be all that I ate. In fact, there might not be as much of a European presence even in America, especially if the Chinese voyages would have pushed from the Japanese side of, like China and Japanese side all the way across to California. There would have been possibly a situation where during this century the Chinese and the Europeans are both settling the United States together. We could have had two separate countries in the United States, not a North and South civil war, but we could have had a war potentially, or a cultural divide between Chinese and Europe in the New World. Maybe they would have settled in different parts of the New World, not in North America. It's hard to really tell, but this never ends up happening. It would have had a profound and huge impact on the world if it would have happened. But we can all say for sure that it did not happen. So this is kind of like what if history, and that kind of history can be fun and interesting to look at, but it's not going to be on the AP test. Let's do it anyway. China is the richest, most prosperous, and most technologically advanced civilization in the world. They have been all semester from the time that civilization really settles in. It is China's game. They are the power player. If the Chinese had aggressively competed with their European counterparts, they would have likely prevailed. They had the superiority. They had the advantage technically and resource-wise for certain. And they decide not to capitalize on that. I'm not certain they know what's at stake, though. Most likely, they would have limited the growth of Christianity, and certainly of Western Europe. And Chinese cultural, economic, and political influences would have flourished beyond East Asia. So this is an interesting question. Now, some historians push this pretty far, and Gavin Menzies is one of these persons. And he wrote a book called 1421, The Year China Discovered the World. And he claimed that the Chinese, not the Europeans, truly discovered America. I could tell him that it seems like the Vikings were here earlier, And there were smaller trips and voyages from smaller boats, I'm sure, that did make it. But, and as you read through this, I'm not going to read through the whole thing. A lot of people believe that his theory is preposterous. I mean, he uses shipwrecks and anchor stones and languages and maps, and he creates a compelling thesis. But I'm not so sure it can be completely proven. And maybe more evidence will come to light, and it'll show that, yeah, there were Chinese people living here in the New World. And I haven't read his book, so I should say that also. And I need to probably read it. But there are so many other things to read that I think are potentially more factually accurate than Gavin Menzies' book. But I do find it fascinating to think of what it would have been like if the Chinese did populate the Americas, and they didn't. So you can discover something just fine, but if you never really lay claim to it, I guess it doesn't matter much in the scope of history. This is the Waldseemüller map of 1507, and it's just 15 years after Columbus has made the trip to the Western Hemisphere. And this is the end, of course, of the unit. We're looking at the end of the 15th century and into the 16th century, and a new world idea of like the global connectedness of the world. And I like the map here for various reasons, but one thing is for sure the German cartographer who made this, the German map maker who made it, is reflecting on this awareness of Europeans that the planet's global dimensions had changed. They have no clue what's in the Americas, obviously, if you look at it. Mostly they think there's a whole lot more of South America than North America, which they were wrong. But what's interesting and compelling is just this idea that the world had changed and people saw it as such. The other part of this is how vastly big and well proportioned in a lot of ways, and it's pretty well done. This map is for Afro-Eurasia. It really does capture a pretty good sense of what it must have looked like. I think they've got Southeast Asia a little off, but you can tell where this map is, and you know where they're at. Now here's another one that's real interesting, and this is the Maridela China map, and it's flipped upside down, isn't it? And I often think about this. I mean, why do we view the world as being kind of the way that it is? The map could be any way that we wanted it to be. Some of the reasons is just the development of voyages and map making that's happening during this time period during the 14th century that sets the stage for people. I have a headache. I'm not going to be able to wear this. That sets the stage for people to understand what the dimensions of the world are like and how it's going to look to us. So this is it, flip back right side up. And if you're looking at it in this angle, you can see it's quite a bit different than what you might expect. What are we looking at here? What is this? Well, we can see it when it's flipped upside down, that this is India and Southeast Asia and China. And then the other side of the world is the Americas. And that looks like could be California, right? So if you flip it, it looks vastly different, doesn't it? The North America's flip sides, and the world looks very different in that way. So it's something to keep in mind. This was the map that many believe is originating from the time period of these voyages by Zheng He. And maps similar to this are found or proposed to have been found. So it's an interesting worldview anyway. This is a fantastic video. It's hosted on my YouTube site. So it's the one of the, and there are a bunch of really good ones. We usually watch them for review at the end of the year over these millenniums. And this one's the 15th century, Century of the Sail. It's excellent, really, really good. But it's older. It's not in high definition, but it's definitely something to check out. I like how they bounce from one part of the globe to the other and pull the story together really, really well. And they cover everything we're discussing here and even show you some other details. So if you're interested in checking that out, that'd be a good thing to learn from as well. So there's the giraffe brought from the Horn of Africa during the 12th year of Yongle. The Chinese associated the giraffe with this mythical Quilin beast. It was a giraffe, but I guess from their own stories and myth, they thought that this was this special beast. So I think in actuality, I'm showing that because it's in the beginning of this video here. It's really pretty cool. Okay, so China is, during this Ming Dynasty, is recovering from the disruption caused by the Mongol rule and the ravages of the plague, which we believe started and originated in Asia and in China. They become the best governed and most prosperous of the world's civilizations. We know this, but then they kick off these impressive maritime explorations. And then they eliminate all signs of foreign rule, is what they're trying to do. They want to completely, during the Ming Dynasty, wash themselves clean of foreign rule and become more Chinese. So they're getting back to what they believe being Chinese is all about. And for them, that's Confucianism. Also, looking here, Emperor Yongle is sponsoring a 11,000 volume encyclopedia. And the key part here is the wisdom of the past. They're trying to capture and hold on to their cultural traditions. They reestablish the civil service exam system, which is a key function and something we've discussed throughout this semester. So I think the encyclopedia part's fairly interesting too, because we kind of think of that as a European invention during the Enlightenment. But even right here, the Chinese really want to capture what it means to be Chinese. So let's talk about comparing 15th century China and Western Europe, and what similarities are there, what differences stand out. So both of them, okay, have some political consolidation. China means this. They have a unitary, centralized government that encompassed almost its entire civilization. And there are time periods where dynasties are shifting and changing, certainly. And there are time periods where, a northern dynasty is rising and they're more in control than maybe a southern one. But they get united in this dynastic fashion almost entirely, and a single ruler or emperor can have a major say in how things are functioning and how it happens. Europe is absolutely fragmented. It's many small, separate, independent, and very competitive states. They do also have sharply divided Christendom, which means that they don't agree even on the principles of their religious foundation. And we're going to see that come into play even more in the spring semester. So while both experience cultural flowering, Europe's culture after the Renaissance is much more different from its own recent past than the Ming Dynasty, which is trying to recreate a pre-Mongol glory. Very important point. Definitely see this on the test, because it captures the essence of what these two places are like and why such a massive power change occurs from China kind of being superseded by, or at least caught up to, by the Europeans. While both set out to explore the purposes for why they did so totally different, and obviously we'll get into that here in just a minute. But again, this is important to think about where we're at. And we looked at this in the first part. The Islamic world is caught in the middle of this. I don't want to forget about them, because they're in some ways superior to the Chinese, because they're actually capturing great wealth. They're experiencing their golden age in the time period right before and during the beginning of this 14th century. But when European exploration changes the game, they've basically unplugged the Islamic empires from world trade, and that includes North Africa. Very important to be considering and thinking about that. Even today, when you look at Africa and the problems that Africa has in terms of infrastructure and economy, education, jobs, and sub-Saharan Africa, there's no question that the roots of that inequality, as far as poverty worldwide and disease, the roots of the inequality in Africa kind of are shaped from here. It's not like the Europeans said, let's screw over Africa. It just happened. Happened naturally. And these Islamic kingdoms are going to change quite a bit. These empires are going to be very different. And they're going to look at the world around them differently in a way, not that maybe they even comprehend that, hey, we're being unplugged from world trade. They're experiencing an economic depreciation. And so it'll be a different world than the spring semester, that's for sure. Let's look at the voyaging of the Europeans, comparing that to the Chinese. And you see Vasco da Gama on the right. Very important. And I could probably make a very good argument that he was the most important of these three explorers, because he makes the most immediate impact on Europe, and he makes the most immediate impact on the world. He is the one that makes that trip around Africa right there and gets to Asia. So, the Chinese exploration is enormous, huge, and their fleet is composed of several hundred large ships, while European exploration is made up of just a few small handful of ships. European motivation is very different from what is motivating the Chinese. In fact, it's just completely opposite. The Chinese are power projecting. They're showing who they are from within, and hey, this is China. We'll do some trading with you, but this is us, and you want to give us some tribute. We're cool with that, but just know who we are and why we're so great and why we're the Middle Kingdom. Christianity in Europe really changes the ballgame here. Europeans are almost obsessed in a way with converts to Christianity. They want to save the world for a Christian world, and the recruitment of possible Christian allies against what they consider to be, we'll discuss later here, the terror of the Turks, the Muslim forces that are controlling trade. China needs no military allies. It requires no trade, really. It can be self-sufficient if it wanted to. It has no desire to really convert foreigners like the Europeans do. And Europe's obsession to monopolize trade and commerce in the Indian Ocean will violently carve out empires in the Americas as well. So the Chinese fleet sought neither conquest nor colonies. China ends its voyages in 1433. Europe continues and escalates, as you will be seeing here. Even in the spring semester, we're going to be touching on that right off the bat. The European maritime explorations are very different too, in terms of like what's happening in these two places. Fragmented political authority in Europe, and it's driven not by an emperor, but by merchants who want to make money. They're the ones who are running the city-states like Florence and Venice and the great Italian city-states. And China's more unified empire and rivalry alone would drive Europeans to the end of the earth to find whatever they needed. Much of Europe's elite, including the merchants, monarchs, and clergy and nobles, had an interest in overseas exploration. This benefited them in all the ways that they wanted to see their legacy grow and what they wanted to do. So Yongel's the primary supporter. When he's gone in China, ball game over, and the voyages end. And the Chinese are very much aware of their own history as well, and we've discussed this some already. The Europeans they want to see, and we'll see the Renaissance occur here, where we're looking back at Roman and Greek times, and they're trying to revive some of that, but they're also looking ahead. They want to be more modern, and they believe, the Chinese do, that they have an absolute superior culture. The Europeans do too. They believe, though, that it's even different. They're unique and special. And that's that idea, I think, of a monotheistic religion that is much more concerned with a person being unique in the eyes of God. It's just a different viewpoint than the Chinese cultural traditions we've discussed. In material terms, the Europeans are seeking out the riches of the East, so they want to get there. But Europeans are also really conscious of the Muslim powers that are blocking easy access to these treasures that they want. And they're very concerned about the military and religious threat to Europe that encompasses this Islamic trading set of empires. However, don't think that it was all-out war between Islam and Christianity. This isn't going to be the Crusades Part 2. Why? Mostly because Europe realizes that trading with the Muslims is absolutely important for them to continue their lifestyle and their way of life until they can capitalize and bypass it. And it's not like people are sitting back and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. Let's build a bunch of little ships and we'll sail around the world and we'll defeat the Islamic nations and we'll surpass China. These are all factors that are happening. They're kind of fitting together, motivations, and just the work of the people in these places are making it happen. And we're looking back and trying to make sense of it. Don't think that they were making sense of it then and making it happen. Although there's some idea of that, in terms of people saying that they want to spread Christianity or become more powerful in Europe. It's not like it was every person's wish across the continent of Europe that they do this. I mean, most people were not even aware of what was happening at the time. But it is happening, and it has very big impact on the world. So here's a map of the empires of the Islamic world. We haven't talked much about Africa, but the Songhai Empire, which you see there in the western part of Africa, the western edge where these rivers are, just below the Sahara deserts. This is sub-Saharan Africa. This is an area today that still is pretty rich in terms of oil and resources, and Americans visit quite often to get that, and sometimes at terrible costs, like we've seen in the past. There's a lot of pretty terrible pollution there as well. But the Ottomans, and that's why the bottom is green here, the Ottomans are the ones that are the most powerful. You've got the Safavid Empire, which is essentially in Iran. Okay, you've got Iraq there, between the land between the two rivers. This is Iraq, and then Iran's right next to it, and then you've got this territory here that's the Safavid Empire. The Mughal Empire is controlling India, and they're also Islamic. So important to remember the Mughals. They always show up on the AP test and kids get confused, and we'll review them some more before the AP test. But for this test, I'd really concern yourself with the Songhai, because they're in western part of Africa, and then also the Ottomans, so we'll look at some more here. The seizure of Constantinople marks a huge change in 1453, so this is towards the middle part of this century, and Chinese Byzantium is now collapsed. And this allows the Ottoman rulers to see themselves as they're the next Roman Empire. And in many ways, if you look at the map, they are. I mean, look at that empire the Ottomans have. Don't make that out to be smaller than it is. It's a massive territory, and they're highly successful. And this is really the heart of the Islamic world. In 1529, they even lay siege to parts of Italy, and they start to encroach upon those Italian city-states. So there are battles and wars, and there is a bit of a struggle for that territory, but it's not the all-out war that you would think it would be, because there is some trading happening and some cultural traditions that are being peacefully coexisting in those territories, what I'm trying to say. The political and military expansion, though, by many Europeans is seen as quite scary. The terror of the Turk. These guys don't look very scary on the right, but these Janissaries, they're the elite force of the Ottoman Empire, were equipped with some of the best technology that was available at the time, so they could be pretty scary, I would think. This is a famous painting by Flemish artist de Bry, and it shows Columbus landing in Hispaniola, which is Haiti. I doubt that it looked like this. In fact, what we know of this voyage and the voyages of Columbus was that he was pretty well shipwrecked and a mess, and the Native Americans helped him to not only get his crew to America, but helped them to survive, and they weren't treated very well by Columbus thereafter. And we'll be discussing much more of that as we go here in the next semester when we think more about Columbian exchange in chapter 14. The Renaissance is also something I want to touch on here because it is very similarly built. You look at the maritime explorations of Europe, well, the Renaissance is what's happening inside Europe and what's being brought out. It's this idea that it's a rebirth of European values of the Roman Empire and Greek traditions. They focus on the affairs of this world rather than the spiritual realm. So, although there are a lot of religious depictions in art, like the statue of David there on the right, there is most certainly an importance with religion in Christianity. But I don't mean to downplay that, because I think Europe is still very, very Christian in a lot of ways. But there's more of a scientific and a technological approach, a much more of a look to the modern world. And so you see art like the Mona Lisa there, which we discussed a little bit before the break, and this outlay for, or the map for the different city-states. That's Pienza. And then at the bottom, we've got the Piazza del Campo in Siena, Tuscany. And it's just an amazingly beautiful place that still emanates that same kind of feel. And you're looking at Florence, Tuscany, in Italy, at the top picture there. This is a fascinating look at engineering an empire, which is about engineering the empire and this new European world. It's Da Vinci's world, and so real interesting if you want to check this out and look at it. I think the link is not working here, but if you look it up on YouTube, you'll definitely find it. And then this is Crash Course the Renaissance, which is also tremendous. Maybe we'll see a little bit of this in the spring semester as well to kick things off, but it's not bad to check it out. There's not much on our test on the Renaissance. It focuses much more on what's happening across the world and the connections that are being made between places. Remember, the Mongols is also going to be on this test, so don't forget about chapter 12 and studying that as well. Don't forget about the companion site, which is very important, and a lot of you have used that in a tremendously good way to study and get some examples of what questions might look like and the thinking process that goes into preparing. So that's important. howtogeta5.com is also a good resource for you. But reading Strayer and focusing on your notes and these notes is what you should definitely be doing. It's my great hope to be back on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll see how this goes. And then I'll review a little bit before we take the test, probably 20 or 30 minutes. And it'll give you a chance to ask some questions and focus in on some things if there are some things that you're concerned about or not sure about. This is the last test of the semester, but there's also the mock AP test. So don't panic and think this is your last chance. Also, and the mock AP test is definitely a good deal, and we've talked about that in class, but we'll talk about some more. Extra credits due Friday. Get your extra credit in. I want it in early so we can put all the information in, and then that way I get a really good idea what your grade is, because it's a big boost. And if you want to exempt the final, then you'll have an idea of being able to do that. Okay. The last thing to look at here is a slide that just states, glancing ahead at where we're heading, since this is really the last part of the notes for the semester and for the year of 2013. Modernity. The quality or condition of being modern. We're going to head into the modern world, and if you look at the map of population in millions on the right, it is kind of intense how during the 15th century you start to see this growth occur. You've got the 1492 period happen here, there's 1500, and now things start to change, and they'll really spike during the time period of industrialization and this technological growth. Strayer mentions this at the end of the chapter, and so I wanted to mention it too because I think it kind of springboards us into the next semester. So hopefully this has been beneficial to you to listen to this while I've been out. It's also on the website. If you have questions, please email me. And if there's some time left, I'll have the substitute play one of the video clips that we would have seen in here, or maybe I'll give you guys a choice to pick from. So hopefully I'll be back Wednesday, Thursday, and let me know if there are any issues or problems. CCOT, we can make that up Friday or after school on Thursday or sometime next week. We have some time. Till next time, don't forget to be awesome.